I'm Anna Trippinell, and today we'll be discussing what are human rights. The term human rights can feel a little lofty, a bit political and somewhat vague, but in fact human rights are so basic. It's the core of what makes us human. I've been working on human rights matters for the past 20 years now, whether in development, conflict, post-conflict countries or with companies, and the one thing I've found is that people do know what human rights are. They don't need to follow any kind of training. People know instinctively as human beings when they are being treated with respect and dignity and when they are not. So, where do human rights come from? International human rights law is actually quite recent. Back in the day, following the wars of the 17th century, governments created the Westphalian system. The Westphalian system basically meant that what happens in your territory is your business. Each state has exclusive sovereignty over its territory. This was the beginning of the modern international system, and this continued until the Second World War. When the world found out about the atrocities that had happened, governments thought, this just isn't right. There are certain things that governments should not be able to do to people, and this led to the birth of the United Nations, that then adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. This was the first international legal document to set out our fundamental human rights, and this soft law document became international human rights law when governments signed two treaties in 1966, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And of course we also have specific human rights conventions. We have ILO conventions focused on labour rights, which are a subset of human rights, and we have regional national laws as well. What's included in human rights? Civil and political rights protect people's freedoms. They ensure that people can participate in civil and political life. Civil rights include, for example, protection from discrimination, which by the way runs through all of the human rights, freedom of opinion, freedom of expression, freedom of movement, freedom of assembly. Political rights include the right to a fair trial, freedom of association, and we have economic, social and cultural rights as well. For example, the right to work in just and favourable conditions, the right to social protection, the right to an adequate standard of living, the right to the highest attainable standards of physical and mental health, the right to education, and the list goes on. What does it mean to have human rights law? Well, states ratify human rights treaties. This means that they have obligations and duties under international law to respect, protect and fulfill human rights. The obligation to fulfill means that states must take positive action to facilitate the enjoyment of human rights. Now, let's conclude by naming the elephant in the room. This question comes up in every workshop I run on this topic. It's all well and good to say that we are all equally entitled to our human rights and that they should not be taken away, i.e. that they are universal and inalienable. Governments don't always respect and protect human rights. Some laws contradict human rights, and some countries have cultures that normalise treatment that is blatantly against human rights. Yes, all true. The existence of human rights doesn't mean that human rights are necessarily respected, protected and fulfilled. Human rights are violated every day in a multitude of ways all around the world. But what it does mean is that we have universal standards that act as a global goalpost against which governments are judged. And we have an international human rights system that seeks to protect these human rights day in, day out. And all of this has implications for companies, which we will see in another video. Thank you for watching and see you next time.